All right, we're on. Well, Lindsay, welcome to the Unruly Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, so you wrote a book, and that is what we are here to talk about today. Can you give our listeners a little intro to your book and what hole you saw this filling in the travel industry, in the queer travel industry?
Sure. So my book is called Out on the Road, The Radical Joy of Queer Travel. And it is a guide that teaches queer travelers how to plan affirming and joyful trips using a mix of personal stories and practical advice. And just to give some background for your listeners, there's not a lot of information out there for LGBTQ travelers. Like if you open a guidebook, any guidebook, there's maybe a page, maybe two, and it might mention, oh, here's a bar that you can go to in this one neighborhood. And it's like, cool, thank you for that recommendation, but there's so much more out there. And so it falls on us to discover it and do our own research. And I wanted to come up with a book that kind of had all of the information that when I was like a young queer traveler, really just first starting out exploring places, traveling around with my wife as part of a couple, that information that I needed to have and needed to know and did not even know to look for.
Right. Your book is filled with things that I've never thought about before when it relates to safety, when it relates to planning. And what really surprised me about your book is that you encourage queer travelers to go to off the beaten path destinations, because when we talk about queer travel, you see an article, you see a video, it usually lists these same destinations over and
Mm-hmm.
over again for queer travelers to go to. And so I kind of almost had that expectation going into the book, but you really took us for a different ride. And you say that the focus on safety when we're talking about queer travel reduces a complex topic to a single story. How so?
Yeah, well, just to echo what you were saying, really the only information that LGBTQ plus travelers tend to get are these lists of, the best countries, the safest countries, that the adjective used to describe them varies a little bit, but it's basically suggesting, these are the places in the world that are safe and you can go there and you don't have to worry. And just in my experience, that's not always true. We can show up in places that are, called the safest, friendliest, best for us and still have microaggressions and still be insulted and still be nervous. And that almost is worse because we've been led to believe, well, New York City is so safe. So why am I being misgendered in the bathroom? And then all of a sudden, that just puts, at least for me, my whole nervous system on guard of like, whoa, I just, and I'm using this as an example because it happens like very regularly when I go to New York City and passing through airports and bus stations and train stations, that I'm misgendered just trying to use the restroom. And then I'm like, whoa, this is not safe. This is not welcoming for me. Like, forget what they say. It doesn't feel that way. And on the flip side of that, all these places that were, warned against, either overtly or just sort of when someone says with a surprise, like, oh, you're going there? Like, oh, okay, right? Usually their voice changes. It reinforces the perception that these places are dangerous for us or that we really need to have our backup. And in fact, some of these places, if we go and we prepare for the risks, can be really welcoming and laid back. And sometimes that's just because, the local people in that country aren't looking at us as queer. They're not looking at us as gender nonconforming or different in that way. They're just seeing, oh, that person's a foreigner and they're not from my culture. And so if they're dressed weird or if they have like a crazy haircut, it's because they're a foreigner, right? And so it almost is like, there's a little bit of extra freedom that comes from that. That is, sometimes surprising that we can have in those spaces. But yeah, just to bring it back to the list approach, like I think my frustration with it and something that I wanted to convey with this book was that the list doesn't give us the tools and it doesn't prepare us for how to move through the world. And so I wanted my book to sort of fill in those gaps by providing the knowledge, the confidence, the tools and advice and skills, that I've learned and that the people that I interviewed for my book, including you, who were so generous sharing your wisdom, that we've all learned by doing it ourselves.
Right, right, because those many of the experiences that you talked about in that book, I mean, you even talked about like gay couples going to countries where being gay is illegal and it's a really high risk if you get caught. And it's really like this trade-off that you talked about sometimes to access a new place in hiding parts of yourself, but like choosing to do that intentionally because you think it's worth it to see that place. So we're definitely going to get into that later into the conversation because I'd love to give listeners some tips, like how do they weigh, is this worth going to? Is this not? Um, but I'd love to know, is there an example of a place that you went to where people maybe did that thing like, oh, you're going there? That was not included on any queer travel list, where you went and just had a fantastic time?
Yeah, so I think the most surprising example for me um, was so I just wrapped up last year visiting every single state in the US. And I was saving Hawaii for the absolute last one. But all of the other ones that I had to go to are ones that are not thought of as safe and welcoming. And so one of those was North Dakota. So I have a friend who does like long distance swims, long distance runs. He just ran the Boston Marathon yesterday. And so he said, there's this swim race in North Dakota I really want to do. It's 36 miles down the river. I'll swim, you can kayak alongside me, and then that's how you'll get to North Dakota. And so I said, sure, why not? Nothing else is bringing me out there. And so we flew into Minneapolis, my wife and I drove to North Dakota, spent the weekend there. We did this kayak thing, so like 10 hours on the water doing this endurance race. And then we had to hang around the next day. It was the rain day for the race. And so we just drove to Fargo. We went to check out like a local art museum and we went to a food hall afterward to get some food. And we walked into this food hall and like, I'm not joking, everyone was queer. Like there was like a butch lesbian working at the dog bakery. There's like a non-binary person who's like complimenting, my friend on his pants. There's like a little lesbian couple on a date, a gay barista. Like I was just like, what is this place? Like it wasn't advertised as queer. There were no rainbow flags anywhere. And yet I was just like, wow, this is so surprising. And if I told people like, oh my God, there is like the gayest food hall ever in North Dakota and you have to go there. And I made one of those lists of like, the secretly gay places that will surprise you and put that on there. Like, I think it would just blow people's minds.
Right. They would be completely in awe of like, how has this made the list?
Yeah.
But I think the beautiful thing to remember that we've talked about a few times on this podcast is that queer people are everywhere, everywhere in the world, in every country, in every state, in every, behind every man-made border crossing, or however we chop up land in different places. So when you go to a place and that's on your radar, I mean, it just automatically is on most of our radars as queer people, and you start to notice that, I don't know, how does that make you feel? Like, what was the feeling when you walked into that place and you were just so surprised?
I think it was a delight. Like it was surprise and delight. And I think there's an antidote to walking around being on guard when you're in a place that is accepting, where you're just like, I'm free and I put down this weight that I didn't even know that I was carrying. And I can just be me without having to like think and surveil the room and make my decisions based on like what I think somebody might say or do. So there's this like sense of freedom that we can tap into but it's like so location dependent in a way and dependent on us, feeling safe in that moment, feeling comfortable to express ourselves. And so I think, yeah, when I went in there and I realized like, oh my God, this is secretly a gay hotspot, right? Like I just got to like set it down and be in the space and be like totally free in that moment, which is something that like
Mm.
I want so many of us to experience because I think it's like really good medicine that we need.
Yeah, really, really good medicine. I totally agree with you. So I'm glad we have people listening in, and I hope that they take away actionable tips and also like want to tap into that feeling that you're talking about where they're pleasantly surprised, where their guard is down, because we can find it and I've found it, and you just walk away more resourced. And I
Yeah.
think that so many of us need that.
Hmm.
In your book, you write that when LGBTQ people question our right to take up space in our home communities, visiting queer friendly spaces reminds us of our inherent belonging. And I think this is really important right now. I've been thinking about it a lot after I launched queer and vegan friendly tours, because a lot of the people who would go on these tours are politically active, are doing grassroots organizing, are doing all of these things. And the idea has kind of been, well, how dare I get out and travel, or how dare I do something relaxing or fun when all of these things are going on in the world? And but at the same time, these people are depleted, they're run down, they're tired, dealing with all of these issues. And so I've been trying to remind people that sometimes travel is what we need to refuel ourselves and keep going. And that's something that you touch on so much in the book. So coming back to that quote that you said, what was really powerful to me is that you wrote inherent belonging. Can you speak to what inherent belonging is and why and how we can use this in travel to replenish ourselves and then keep doing the important work?
Yeah, sure. Let me expand on that a bit. I mean, I will preface it by saying that like it's hard for me sometimes. Like I am a person who grew up just feeling different, feeling like I didn't really fit in my community, like for various reasons, right? Like I was an only child and all my friends had siblings. I was left-handed, so like literally things were not made for me and were more challenging for me to use in ways that like most people don't understand. And
Mm.
I was queer, which I didn't discover until like my late teen years. Um, but I think that gave me a different window on the world around me because I didn't fit in the dominant culture to see it, to question it, to look for, the places and the people that felt like fits. And reading for me was like a huge way to engage with the world and to feel like I belonged. And so to bring it back to inherent belonging, it's like all of this, I guess, conditioning made me feel like I belonged less than other people in my community because I had these differences, some of which were visible. You see me using my left hand, some of which invisible, right? Like only I knew I was an only child, right? Like people couldn't tell by seeing me, like, oh, their parents are divorced. Everyone else's parents are together, right? Like poor Lindsay.
Mhm.
And so I believe, and sometimes I have to remind myself of this, that we all belong. Nobody belongs more. We've just given certain privileges and preferences to certain groups of people. And so if you fall into that privileged category, then the world is just easier for you to move through. And that's not fair, but it's true, right? You don't have to worry about your safety as much. You don't have to worry about like, could I be physically vulnerable in this moment? Could somebody be trying to take advantage of me? Um, but reminding myself, and for the people listening in or reading the book, reminding yourself of your inherent belonging, I think is empowering and soothing. Like it's a way to soothe that part of your brain that says, I don't fit here. I am different. Like if they look at me and they see this about me, they're not going to treat me the same. It's like you belong here and sitting with that and like letting that knowledge soak into your body, into your brain, into your heart, and really feeling that, I think can be uncomfortable, but ultimately really healing to have that experience of being like, I belong here, I belong in this space, I belong in this community, right? Like, I belong on this queer vegan group tour just as much as everyone else here. And so, what
Mhm.
is this part of me that's questioning that? Right? Like, that can be uncomfortable, that can be triggering, but like, it's there. And seeing it is sort of the first step to engaging with it critically and pushing back, from a place of love. Like, I hear that questioning. I hear that old story of like, everyone else fits in the room but me, right? Like, and I'm choosing not to believe it anymore. Like, I'm choosing to say, I belong here.
So have there been times where maybe you didn't feel that inherent belonging or you were distanced from it, in your regular life, and then you traveled somewhere and you regained that connection?
Mhm. I'm going to think about this backwards. I'm going to think about where did I feel like the most connected and rooted when I traveled. Hmm. All right. So I think that going to Japan was very affirming for me in interesting ways. Because when I was preparing to go, I was like mostly thinking about um, the ways the Japanese culture is very traditional in its gender norms and how that would be challenging for somebody like me. And so I had some nervousness around like, how will I be received? And like, what will it be like for me to go to places like onsens, Japanese hot springs, where like they're segregated by sex and there's only male and female. And like, am I going to be challenged in these spaces or am I just going to be feeling uncomfortable? Um, but I found in so many ways that things that are normative in Japanese culture are just so soothing and respectful to me. Like people are polite, people are mindful of sort of not taking up a lot of space in public and not in a way that's self-effacing, but in a way of like they would never take a phone call out loud or play their music out loud or play a game out loud on the subway. All of these ways that like noise just invades public space because Americans like do not care anymore. And I was just
Yes,
like, I am
yes.
not just like, the old crank, right? Like bothered by
Right.
these things. Like I don't need to have more tolerance for disrespectful people. There is like a norm in this culture that I'm visiting of
Mm.
respect for everybody. And it's not like respect for foreigners or respect for elder people over younger people or over local people. It was just a cultural norm that applied to everybody. And so seeing that,
Mm.
was like, A, my trip is so much more peaceful. And B, like, I don't have to settle for like these aggravations, right? Like, I don't have to adjust downward my expectations of like, you know, these things that I hold.
Yeah, I think too what you're talking about, or this is how it popped up in my mind, is like there's these pieces of us, whether it's queerness, whether it's, oh my gosh, I'm so sound sensitive, so that is
Mm,
like always on my mind and I really struggle. Or whatever it is that people tell us we're too sensitive about or too different about. And there's these little pieces I feel like they get chipped away. And when you go visit other places, it's like they're restored and you're like, "Oh, yeah, like this is fine and I can return to my home base with like a different idea now that I know that this is possible and there are other people out there." And that's such a good feeling. I love your story about going to Japan and being surprised in a good way
yeah.
by this way of being that we don't really have here in the US. And can you articulate for listeners what it feels like when you come back to that sense of inherent belonging, even if it's something as simple as like you went there and you're like, oh, these people are just like respectful
Yeah.
and not like taking up way too much space. Like, what does that feel like when it settles in?
Sure. Yeah. So as I mentioned at a few points in Out on the Road, like I'm an anxious person. And sometimes that manifests as in like having a lot of anxiety and nervousness and carrying that around. And sometimes it's more in vigilance, right? And so being on guard and being on high alert when I'm traveling somewhere to see like who's around me, what's it like, right? Like not out of fear for a specific threat, because in the moment, that's fine. If you're thinking like, oh, there's a specific threat in this environment, let me make sure that I'm in a safe place, then that's when you want to be hyper vigilant. But like all the time, no, that's very distressing. So for me, when I feel that sense of belonging, it's like a systemic relaxing and soothing. And I don't have that overthinking. I don't have that anxiety. I'm just much more present and grounded in the moment.
And that's such a good feeling for your nervous system.
Yeah, yeah. And so
You
for me, I think like learning to recognize that, learning to notice like what does it feel like? And then like to just kind of have that internal reminder of like, oh, I'm so calm. Oh, this is so peaceful. You know, whatever words I want to attach to it. But just the more that I'm able to notice that state, the more I can replicate it, either by like putting myself in a similar situation or just if I start to feel that anxiety come in, like reminding myself that I'm safe where I am and reminding myself of like all of the other times that like I was in a similar situation that was wonderful and soothing and like putting myself in there, right? Sometimes it takes a bit of effort, but once like our bodies and our minds get that message, then we can relax.
Yeah, it seems like that is a point, that feeling of like being not hypervigilant and feeling relaxed and present is this point that we can orient back to, but it takes some practice for
Yeah, I
sure.
think for sure for queer people, it takes some practice. And I think it can feel a bit forced at some point, but the more we do it and the more we teach ourselves, like through lived experience, that we are safe, it's safe to relax, like safe to be our authentic selves, like we can let our guards down and just be, and the world is safe for us, then the more we can like tap into like feeling really good and feeling joy and feeling like confident in expressing that.
Right. Which is, you talk about, I mean, you talk about travel as a tool to reclaim power and pleasure. And that's really what, like, all those words and feelings
Mm.
lead me back to that we're talking about. And in your book, you noted that LGBTQ plus Americans are more than twice as likely as than the general population to have a valid passport, and that they spend 100,000 or 100 billion on travel annually. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that this group of people is more likely to have a passport and want to get out there?
I think it gets back to our desire for belonging that we've been talking about. I think that
Mm,
a lot of queer people grow up feeling like they don't fit in their community, you know, sometimes they don't fit in their family, they're, you know, pressured overtly or subtly to be different than how they naturally are. And so I think travel is almost a way to escape that conditioning, to take a little bit of charge for ourselves of like, well, if I don't fit in this environment that I come from, then where in the world might I fit? And like, who in the world is like me? And so by traveling, we can really look for that belonging out there in the world and even look for it in ourselves and find some of that inherent belonging that we've been talking about that can sometimes feel a bit distant, hard to access.
right, because it's always within us. It's just like the setting and the people and the energy that sometimes cuts that off.
Mm. And I don't know if you're an animal person, but like for me, my dogs are a great teacher of this. Like they just
Mm.
love me all the time, even if I'm in a bad mood. You know, even if I'm grumpy or if I'm in a good mood, I don't need to do anything to earn their love. Like they just love me and they reflect that belonging to me.
That's beautiful. I do think other animals who we live with, who are our companions that are used to us and get comfortable with us, are such a great reflection of this because they don't have all these, imaginary borders and these things about class and race and gender. Like it's not there with them. And so that's a great resource for people who are wanting to tap into that. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we talk about queer travel, right, we're talking about like the really good feelings we want people to access, but there are big challenges, dangerous challenges that queer people face while traveling. Some of the things that can bring on lots of anxiety for queer travelers are just like anti-LGBTQ laws in other countries, navigating TSA, maybe as a trans person or non-binary person, just harassment that you could experience anywhere in the world. And these are things that you touch on in your book, and you give some guidance for people to prepare, like by writing scripts or deciding what they're going to do in that moment. But I thought it was really interesting because you shared this story of when you were in high school, and I think you were like drinking coffee somewhere, and this group of, I wrote group of bros. You just said group of
Yeah.
men, but this is how I imagine the story. This group of bros pulled up in a Jeep and they yelled like dyke at you. And in the moment, I thought this was going to be like, oh my gosh, blah, blah, blah. You said you were thrilled because they saw this part of you that you felt like you couldn't show the world yet. And, in another instant, maybe later in life, where you are now, if you're traveling in another country, that could be really abrasive or even scary. So this story that you wrote really taught me that how we're going to internalize things is really like where we are at. So there's
Mm.
negotiating that we have to do with ourselves. So can you talk about some of the ways we can prepare for these uncomfortable experiences while traveling?
Yeah. So it's funny because I'll be writing a newsletter about this later today, but I came across another absolutely wild statistic about how much
Mm,
research queer people do to travel. And like on average, I think the study said that we do 12 hours of additional research to plan a trip. And this is the time that it takes us to like figure out, okay, here's where I'm going. And like, is it safe and accepting for me? And like, where can I find that safety and acceptance if the destination that I'm visiting is not safe? Like 12 extra hours.
wow.
And I really
That's
like
a
travel
lot.
planning. So for me, like, that's part of the fun. But I'm going to say, for your listeners, like, it all starts with research because we're just given these broad brushstroke warnings of this place is safe or this place is unsafe, right? This country has LGBTQ rights or it doesn't, right? We're very rarely
Mhm.
given the nuance. And so the first step to preparing is to go and educate ourselves and get that knowledge of like, what is it like in this place that I'm visiting now? Not like, what was it like, but what is it like now? What are the laws on the ground now? And how are these laws going to affect me based on, my gender identity, my gender expression, who I'm traveling with, like where I'm going. And that's going to be different, if you're a parent, that's going to be different. If you're a parent of queer kids, that's going to be different. If you're a same-sex couple or trans or non-binary person, those are going to be different based on your identity. And it can feel a bit uncomfortable to like look at this information in the face, but that's ultimately how you prepare and reclaim your power. And so in Out on the Road, I list like all of my favorite sites to do that. And I even go deeper into like how to research if hotels or, resorts or any place that you might want to go is LGBTQ plus friendly because they don't always advertise it and they don't always have rainbow flags. And so you really have to like do this like kind of detective work to figure it out.
Yeah.
And this can take
Right.
a lot of time. But once you've kind of gathered this information for yourself, you can like begin to sort out like, okay, you know, this isn't just a dangerous place. Here are the specific risks that I have to think about. Like, it's illegal to be gay. Okay, well, like, A, do I want to go there? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. And if you do, like, how can you ensure your safety, right? You can decide, I'm going to just pretend to be straight and like, have a conversation with anyone you're with. Like, we're pretending I'm straight, we're pretending I have a boyfriend back home, we're pretending this or that. Like, build your cover story so that you feel like, okay, this is what I'm going to do, right? And it doesn't feel good to do that, but in that situation, it's maybe necessary for your safety. You might decide, I think I want to go on a group tour because nobody's going to look at me in a pack of like 15 other white Westerners. Like, they're just not even going to look twice, and I'm going to feel better. And like, that's an
Mhm.
option, and that costs more money than going independently, but it might be worth it to sort of outsource your safety.
Right. These are great examples of, yeah, outsourcing your safety, feeling a little bit more comfortable. You also wrote about the magic of TSA pre-check. Can you talk about that for travelers?
Yeah, and I will say, like, this came as a total surprise to me. Like, I did not apply for a pre-check because I wanted it. I applied for it because I did not want to miss like a super short layover that I had and get stuck in the Miami airport. Like, I was like
Mm.
already like nervous about flying through Miami as a queer person in a state that has these don't say gay laws and other laws, and having to be like visibly gender nonconforming in that space. So I was like, if this is gonna help me like skip the line, it's worth it. And I was so nervous going for, because we did global entry. I was so nervous going for my entry. I was like, the TSA is like my biggest nightmare when traveling, because every time I go through those body scanners, like, I get pulled aside, I get frisked, I'm asked these rude questions, I'm like looked at like I'm threatening, and it causes me so much anxiety. And now I have to go and sit in a small room with a TSA officer. Like, what? No, no way. But I do it, like, I, force myself to do it because, again, I want to like avoid getting stuck in Miami airport. And everything works out. I get my, TSA card and everything. I show up at the airport for that first time, and it's like, boom, shorter line, like old-fashioned metal detectors, like no body scanners, no weird looks, no weird questions. Like, I'm given this privilege because I'm like a trusted traveler, and I'm treated with respect because like I joined this program. And like, that feels frustrating in a way. It feels like, well, we all should be treated with respect. We should
Mhm.
not be like presumed threatening, but this is like the surveillance system that we live in and operate under, right? But for me, as like a gender nonconforming person whose body was viewed with such suspicion, to just be given back my dignity was like absolutely amazing. And like, overnight, like literally from that first flight on, I've never had to go through a body scanner in years. I think it's been like 3 years. And my anxiety went from like huge, like heart pounding, sweating, like constant ruminating, standing in line, to like, I don't even stress about it. So I think that's one of those things that like every queer and trans person should like, I'm not sure about now under Trump's government, like, but it's absolutely a life changer if you have it.
Wow. It's something that I didn't really think of before for queer travelers, but taking out that much anxiety, taking out that much suspicion is like a huge game changer because the airport is like where many of our trips start. And if you
Mhm.
started off on the wrong foot, already feeling out of place, like you don't belong, like we were talking about, I mean, that's huge. So I
Yeah.
really encourage readers and listeners that if they want more tips to check out your book because you gave such a great list and you talk about like trading off going back into the closet to be able to travel and like safety as this continuum. And like you said, these things can feel really bad. Like they can feel like you're like, I don't know, betraying part of yourself. But I think it's really what's worth it for you at that time. And yeah, can you give anyone encouragement if they're like, I really want to go to this place, but I'm going to have to go back into the closet, or these parts of me have to, and I'm just feeling like I betrayed myself? What would you say to those people?
Yeah. I mean, I would first of all say, like, all of those feelings are valid, right? Like, something can feel icky, but then if we start to judge ourselves about it, it's like, okay, well, then you're piling on, right? Like, you're
Right.
getting upset at yourself because it feels icky. Like, it's not helpful to the situation, right? Like, I have to remind myself of this all the time, just to be really real, right? But,
Mhm.
I think there's so many amazing sites in the world. And if we only stick with like the so-called safe countries list and we're only seeing the things that we can see there, then we miss out on so much. And so if something really calls to you, right? Like, um, if you have this desire to, like I'll use Egypt as an example because I talk about going there in the book, but if you have a desire to go and see the pyramids and you're like, I really want to see this, right? I really want to go. And you know that like Egypt's not a great place to be LGBTQ plus, well, then you can either not go and deny yourself this experience that you want to have, or you can go and plan for like how to do it and protect yourself and mitigate the risks, And so I think if you just go back into the closet or default to, hiding or passing for straight because you think that that's your only option, that can feel really disempowering and it can feel like that self-betrayal. But if you like work through it mentally and come out the other side understanding like, I'm doing this for now. I'm going into hiding for now because I want to see the pyramids, because I want to have this experience, because, wanting to see it is worth it, right? And like, why would I deny myself that? Then that kind of takes away some of that negativity. And you're just like, okay, it's a compromise I'm making, just like other compromises that you might make, right? Like,
Right.
it's like,
Yeah, and it's temporary too, which doesn't make it feel less icky. But I think many of these things, like when we're uncomfortable traveling, it could be for this reason, it could be for another reason because, safety standards are not what we're used to, or like the beds are different, or the bathrooms are different, or we're getting frustrated with the language. Like everything when we're traveling is temporary. And I think that's a good reminder for myself as well when I'm just feeling overwhelmed, overstimulated traveling, and like, why did I get myself into this? Which, I imagine people feel like if they're feeling like they went back into the closet and they're going to have really frustrating moments out there. And it's a good
yeah.
reminder.
And like if in that case, like I would say like if you anticipate being stressed out and anxious, like because of that or like anything else, right? Just like you can identify ways to take like very good care of yourself, And sometimes that's like staying in and doing lots of self-care. And sometimes that's like, I'm gonna see if there's any queer spaces that exist that I can go visit so I can like take off the mask and like be in a queer space.
Yeah. And that moved perfectly into the other topic that I wanted to talk to you about, which was traveling for wellness or traveling for rejuvenation. Because you talk about how travel can promote rest, relaxation, a fresh perspective, broadens our horizons and helps us deepen relationships with our loved ones that we're traveling with, and also we get this cultural exchange. Is there anything else that you would add when you're thinking about traveling for wellness? Because in the book, this is like such a big part, and you talk about different places that you've gone to specifically for wellness or to heal. Um, and it's something I don't think about all the time, but I think it's something that queer travelers should think about because we're often at like a deficit, and this is like a really important part of self-care. So
Hmm.
what would you add to that list of what people can experience when they travel for wellness?
Oh my God, so much. I mean, I think first of all, like it really depends on intentionality. And so if you're approaching it like it's a bucket list of experiences and you're checking them off, that's probably not going to feel restorative. But if you're approaching it with like intentionality and slowness, then like a trip can be really rejuvenating and it doesn't necessarily involve spending a lot of money. And something that I was reflecting on recently was like how many other cultures often have publicly accessible wellness amenities. Like where I live in the Hudson Valley, we're just getting into all of these community saunas. So there are these like mobile saunas popping up in local parks, and you can go, and it's like, not that expensive. And they even have kind of like a weekly queer night or monthly queer night. So if you're like, I don't want to be in like a gender normative space, then you can wait for the queer night and go then. And how it really makes that amenity of a sauna publicly accessible in a way that like generally in America it's not, right? Like maybe you live in a fancy apartment building that has that as an amenity, or you go to an upscale gym and it has that as an amenity, or like, you know, you have a wealthy friend and they have a sauna and they invite you over. But like for a lot of people, it's really inaccessible.
Mm.
And in other countries, these amenities are so much more like public goods where it's part of the community. It's a really low rate and everybody goes there. And it's, how people socialize and come together and how they take care of themselves. And so it's both like, the social emotional health and physical well-being. And so I think often like adding in these things that we think of as luxuries here in the US, it doesn't have to mean like having a crazy expensive vacation or blowing your budget. Like it can often be like, oh, it's actually really affordable to go and do this. And it's like so good for me in so many ways.
Right. When you were talking about that, I was thinking about when I visited Ecuador and they had like the public hot springs, and the ones for travelers were like, it was like $100 for a day pass. And I'm like, oh,
Hmm.
that is inaccessible to me. That's not happening. And then, I do a little bit of digging. The ones for locals is a dollar to go in all day, stay as long as you want. And it was exactly what you said. We went in, it was a place where people were socializing. I feel like we got to actually talk to locals and have this more, I don't even want to say authentic experience, but like grounded experience, right? It's like I want to see what the locals are up to and what they're doing at 2 p.m. on a Thursday, and I
Right.
got to see that and talk to people. So I think, yeah, it's really great advice for people when they're traveling, because maybe they're not going on a wellness trip per se, but maybe once a week they can look for something like that and incorporate it into their trip. And that's a great way to not blow the budget. Um, you also talk about going to places for maybe retreats that are specifically for one thing or another. And I'm seeing that becoming more popular with like group trips or even queer group trips. So these are great options for people, because I don't know if you've ever felt this way, but sometimes I feel like as like, I don't know, a budget backpacker, like those are my roots. When I go to
Hmm.
travel, I'm thinking like adventure, like living it up. Like what can we do that gets the adrenaline going? And it was only last year where I stopped and thought, maybe I should go somewhere that like the whole 5 days is dedicated to like slowness and healing. And so I don't think it's something that's always on our radars.
Yeah. For me, there's a constant tendency um, between like wanting to see everything, right? So really filling my day
Mhm.
and like wanting to slow down so that I don't burn it, right? Because like at the start of the week, I'm like, oh, it's great, it's great. Oh my God, right? And then it like, and either it gets tiring or it's hard to appreciate, right? So like for
Right.
me, like indulging that counterintuitive, like want to slow down and savor feels like that feels like a luxury. Like saying like I can linger, right? I can linger in this hot tub. I can linger over this like really lovely meal. Like I can just stay in the park that I'm like enjoying the weather in. I don't have to get up and like go on to the next thing.
I like that, linger. That's a good word for people to keep in mind when they're feeling rushed or feeling like they need to get through their itinerary.
Oh
Um,
yeah, no, I know.
it's because it's another thing that I was just talking to a friend about, like when we plan our trips, it's like many people want to plan every hour of the day. And that doesn't leave space for that lingering. And it doesn't leave space for when you happen in that food hall and you notice that it's just full of queer people to linger in there and like hang out with them and take that mask off and slow down. So I really am loving the word linger. That's going to be incorporated into my travel much more now.
Awesome. I'm excited to see
What
where
are
that
some
takes you.
Oh, me too. Me too. I feel like it often takes you like into the home of locals or into parks or all these places that weren't previously accessible when you're rushing through an itinerary.
Hmm.
What are some ways? So let's say you're on a trip, you're lingering, or you would like to be lingering and in that mindset. What are some ways that you come back to your body to be able to access that?
Hmm. I think, let me see. I think often like using our senses, all of our senses, we tend to be visual people first, but right, we have so many senses, and those can be portals back to our body. So if we're eating something really yummy, drinking something really yummy, like appreciating that flavor and that taste. Or if we're listening to music or hearing like, oh gosh, the bugs are really loud in this place I'm visiting, right? Like I remember being in Puerto Rico in the rainforest and hearing the coqui frogs like serenading me to sleep. So magical. And just all of the senses, if we follow what we're hearing, seeing, smelling, can be a portal to notice what's around us and notice in our body. So that's like one, like kind of trick I use if I feel like my attention is wandering, right? To bring it back to the moment.
Yeah, and I think that travel often gives us the opportunity to notice these things because everything's new and everything's different. Um, and I definitely notice for myself, like when I go on a trip, I'm more tapped into my senses, I'm more in the moment, and then I come home and I can do that better as well. Like notice trees I haven't noticed before, or animals or bugs, and just bring a
Yeah.
little bit of that relaxation back with me.
Yeah. And like right now, as we're speaking, it's, the trees are budding out right here. And so it's a great time to practice that. Like on my daily walks with the dogs and in daily life, like, oh, that flower's up today. It wasn't up yesterday. Like
Right.
the trees are opening, these flowers are closing. Like just to say, if people like are excited about this and they're not traveling, like you can do this in your daily lives. It takes a little bit more effort, but it's totally
You can
possible.
linger in your daily life as well.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, I want to close it up with our surprise question, which we usually open with. Um, and I have two for you.
Okay.
One is, what is the worst travel advice that you've gotten? This could be in general or like specifically as a queer traveler.
The worst advice. Oh my gosh. I'm trying to think. I think the worst advice I've ever gotten is like unfounded concern. And we've been talking about that a lot in this conversation, but like
Right.
the generic, like, don't go there warnings, or like, oh, that place was terrible. And it's like, okay, well, why was it terrible for you? Right. Because sometimes it's like, yeah, if that museum was a waste of your time, please tell me that, but be specific, right? Don't just say, like, this place was bad.
It's funny that I've asked this question every once in a while to travelers on the podcast, and this has come up as the worst advice that like I can count like five people have said over and over again
Mm,
is people warning them not to go somewhere with no particular reason or a reason that it doesn't apply to them.
yeah.
Um, so
Yeah. And
that's
it's like,
such a
if you
great
had a
reminder.
terrible time somewhere, I absolutely want to hear about it. I am a sucker for those kinds of stories of like the worst vacation
Yeah.
you ever had. Like I love those stories.
Right.
So tell me about it to
Right.
entertain me. Don't just give me this
Yeah.
warning and that's not explained.
Right. You need to know the story.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
Well, and what's one of the best or the better pieces of advice that you would want to pass on to queer travelers specifically?
Mm, let me see. I think it's hard to distill this in advice, but I want them to feel empowered to go where they feel called to explore, right? To like tear up and throw away the list of approved countries. And that if they really want to go somewhere, really want to see something, to feel like I know that I can figure out how to see this place that feels like good and comfortable for me, and anyone who's like, that sounds awesome, but how do I get there? Like, in Out on the Road, I share all kinds of tips and tools to help you make those decisions for yourselves.
Beautiful. That's a great piece of advice to end on here to remind people. I mean, this is the reminder we get when we're travel that other things are possible, that what we imagined is possible. And so I think these trips for queer travelers, they are possible with a little bit of planning. So thank you so much for sharing that. Can you let us know how listeners can connect with you, how they can find your book, all of those good things?
Sure. So my book, Out on the Road, is available to be ordered all the major retailers, and I can make sure that you have a link for that to share with your listeners. And I give my best travel advice and track travel trends and share details on Queer Adventures, which is my LGBTQ plus travel blog. And there's also a newsletter that goes out with that. So if you go to queeradventures.com, you can find those links, sign up for the newsletter. Yeah, stay connected.
Beautiful. Thank you.